Welcome, everyone, to Mythstorie, a podcast about myths and history. I am one of your hosts, Bryant, with my permanent guest, Cammy. Hey, Cammy, what up?
Hey, Bryant, how are you?
I'm good. I just got back getting Kinley from school, which means sitting in my car and just sweating. So I'm glad you can't smell me right now.
Yeah, I
How
just picked up a kid from school as well.
It's great. We're both working hard. So, Cammy, we've got a fun topic today on mystery. We pick anything from mythological figures to legends to historical events. This one's a little more grounded. It's Sir Francis Drake, the very famous or infamous British pirate of the 16th century. You probably have heard of him. We know him from the Uncharted video game series. I think is really where it kind of came up, and that's fun. That's Nathan Drake says he's related to him. Who knows? But that's
Well,
what we're
in
going
the
to talk
third
about
one, you
here.
find out, or the fourth one?
I don't know. I can't
The
remember.
fourth one, you find out the truth.
Oh, I don't even remember the truth anymore. Well, geez, we might have
Well,
to
you got to play it again.
Yeah, I really should. But this is a fun story that we're going to get into. We've got a lot to kind of cover, but Cammy will give the story, and then I'll go into some of the history and stuff that's behind it. This guy what he did was pretty wild, and what it did for England too. So, Cammy, please take us away with your story.
Sure. So I used a couple of Wikipedia articles, the Golden Hind and the Francis Drake page as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I also used an article from Wired, April 4th, 1581, Francis Drake knighted by his grateful queen. Francis Drake, the notorious pirate, had found a crew for another profitable voyage. He told the men he was going to traverse the Nile to trade along Egypt's famous route. But it wasn't long before the men realized they were sailing a different path entirely. He led them through the Strait of Magellan onto the Pacific Ocean, but he reached the sea at great cost. Only 3 ships of the original fleet remained, but he pressed on. His goal was treasure. His target, with the request and purse of the crown, was Spain's settlements along the America's coastline. Of the 3 ships who made it to the Pacific, only one weathered the rough seas near South America. A terrible storm caused the Marigold to sink with all the sailors aboard. The second ship had to return to England, so Drake sailed the Pelican, newly christened the Golden Hind, onto the settlements he wished to plunder. He sacked cities all along the Pacific coast of modern-day California, plundering treasure from every port he came across, and claimed the land for the crown. When he headed home, he had traveled 36,000 miles, becoming the first man to circumnavigate the world. When he returned, he invited Queen Elizabeth I aboard his ship to see the wonders for herself. When she boarded the vessel, she asked the ambassador of France to accompany her. For what she was about to do was unheard of, and she wanted her move to signal a trust between the two nations. So on April 4th, 1581, surrounded by the gold the pirate plundered for his queen, she had Drake kneel before her and drew a sword. He bowed, unsure of what would come next. She taps each of his shoulders with the blade and said, "I W Sir Francis Drake." The pirate was now a knight.
Hey, it must have been a hard sell. Like all this gold, make a pirate, a sir, a knighted. Yeah, that happened. This guy was knighted by the Queen of England at the time, Queen Elizabeth. This is the 16th century, so Columbus sailed the ocean blue when, Cammy?
1482?
92.
92. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I knew it rhymed.
Just 1492. Yeah, there's the 2. That's so we're kind of well into the ability to start kind of going here, but it's still fairly early on in the transatlantic voyages. But Drake really kind of took it over and became like an expert very quickly. He is so he was born around 1540. His exact birth date isn't super known, and as far as sources go here, what I use, of course, I Britannica and Wikipedia History had an elaborate write-up. Biography.com that I used recently had a great write-up too. But there's a ton of secondary sources. This guy has been written about a ton by major historians over the last 100 years. There's tons of books, and it's really interesting to see. I kind of scanned some of those secondary sources. One of the ones I liked was this essay. I only briefly looked at it, but it is available online for free. It's by David Quinn. It's entitled Sir Francis Drake as Seen by His Contemporaries, an Essay. So it wasn't too long. I scanned through it, and I like that. And that what's cool about this time period, the 16th century, is it was really important. It had been really important for hundreds of years to document things, especially with these voyages, these transatlantic voyages. I took a Latin American history course when I was in high school, and I got a little bit of a colonial time period one, and I got an idea of how important it was for like these Portuguese and Spanish ships to keep to be insured, to have insurance on their ships. You know, like you can't just fund a voyage without insurance, because a storm might take it, and then 5 years later it's confirmed gone and no one's seen it, and you get some money back. But you wanted to log everything for tax purposes. It was really important, all these things. So I guess the benefit of that is we get to see like two sides of it too, because there's even like notes from Francis Drake that we have. There's diaries. There's tons of contemporary and primary sources that kind of talk about the events, but there's also like, logs and these like official sources that kind of show a back end of things that is really cool, because that's for a long time, basically after the 1560s into the 1570s, Drake was like an official privateer, which is basically a pirate that's commissioned federally by the government. Like, you go be a pirate for me. And there were rules. There were some crazy rules about all that too. I remember watching the show Turn, the AMC show, and they talk about that a little bit too. There's some weird legal stuff that goes around. Like it's like legal piracy, pretty much. Honestly, it's wild. So Drake, he started off pretty early. It seems like his family was well off for the most part, or well to do, I should say. But I mean, he did have to work, but he was apprenticed to a merchant, and would soon work with William Hawkins, who I believe was a merchant, had his own ship called a bark, and he actually liked Drake so much, his seamanship and what he conveyed. He gave Drake the bark in his will. And Drake would work very closely with John Hawkins, who was the cousin of William Hawkins. They worked for quite a while. In the 1560s is where things really start to ramp up for Drake. They have a immensely successful break on the Portuguese. The Portuguese at this time were the kings of literally the monopoly of the West Atlantic slave trade. And they successfully essentially stole ships, but it looks like they hijacked the cargo, which was people, and then would sell them on their behalf in their profit. So this is scholars like Chris Lane actually note that Drake and Hawkins are essentially some of the first English slave traders of the West Atlantic slave trade, and which is wild. And it's been a big topic of controversy. And so there's a lot of modern things like Drake essentially like founded California for England. He was the first like Englishman to land in California, and in today that's reflected. He called it New Albion, and there's like roads named after him. There's statues. A lot of that's been changing lately, and I think that's a good thing, because Drake, after his success, was sort of roped up into this idea of like Anglo identity that Wikipedia calls it this racialism idea that helped feed ideas like manifest destiny. So while Drake, this was definitely not something to praise about, Drake was a really prolific adventurer, aside from this. And at least as far as it goes, he doesn't seem to have worked on this at all. And Wikipedia even says that it's assumed that he was on those voyages to that the Hawkins was a part of. Anyway, so after the 1560s, or in the late 1560s, though, while him and Hawkins were doing their thing, they were attacked, essentially in a counterattack, by in a Mexican port. This totally changed Drake's sort of point of view on things. Hawkins and Drake made it alive, but just barely. Great cost. And the historians sort of note this is when Drake became the bane of Spain's existence. This is when Drake really took a personal hate against King Philip II of Spain, and he ended up becoming he earned the name El Draque, which means the dragon, and apparently racked up a bounty that was worth several $million. So can you imagine if you captured Drake today, you could actually afford a home? It's true. All you'd have to do is capture him. But yeah, it's pretty wild. His most famous stuff was in like the 1560s and 70s. He had this big escapade where he attacked. Let me see where I put it. Yeah, they basically, during some raids in the 1570s, they captured 20 tons of silver and gold. They had to bury so much of it because it was too much. Drake so they're literally burying it while they're being pursued, but Drake rallies his men, buries the treasure, they build a raft to sail 10 miles to actually make it to the dockyard where his ship is. They think that things are like going terrible, and he reportedly pulls like he looks terrible, pulls a necklace of Spanish gold from his neck and says, "Our voyage is made, lads." So he's very like, I think everything we get from like Pirates of the Caribbean is like this guy. But they say investors that went on one of these voyages got a 4,000% return on it. Queen Elizabeth did in 1572 actually hire him to become a privateer, but a lot of his stuff she actually couldn't officially do because she had signed peace contracts with Spain, especially after Hawkins had attacked the Portuguese West African slave trade ships. They'd send ambassadors. There was a lot of stuff going on, but they still kind of kept it going, just sort of incognito. So after that 68 attack, Drake, he becomes an asset of the crown. He focuses on not just getting loot, but specifically raiding and attacking the Spanish. After his circumnavigation in 77, though, he comes back in the 1580s. He's knighted. He gets an estate. He becomes a politician, and he is actually later appointed a vice admiral of the Navy in 1588 when there is the specific Spanish and Anglo wars that would end shortly after, or a couple years after Francis Drake died. So it's pretty wild. He does sadly end up just kind of dying of dysentery. This magical dude who made the Atlantic voyage several times over, gets dysentery and dies in the late 1590s. He was in his late 50s when it happened, but his legacy really went on after that. It's really cool, actually. There's a ton of folklore in Chile and other Latin American countries where they believe there is buried treasure specifically. So there's a lot of these motifs, and I mean, it was a tactic that they would use. They would have so much that they couldn't carry, so that they
that
quite
ship
literally would.
sunk. The Marigold sunk. I mean,
Yeah.
so you have the ship, the whole cruise there. I mean, they've been plundering every ship they came across that had a Spanish flag for the entire voyage. So I'm sure there was stuff on that ship,
right?
For one.
Yeah. That essay that I mentioned, as he was seen by his contemporaries, in the prologue of it, he does note that he gained a lot of notoriety in Catholic countries, and I was surprised that he said that, and that makes sense. It really encompasses it too. Drake was present during what's called the Rathlin Island Massacre. This was a containment event that happened in Ireland. Drake doesn't seem to have taken part of it, other than essentially kind of acting as a blockade from reinforcements, but many Irish people were just slaughtered by ships, these people who were trying to rebel. And so it does, he really does seem, like notoriety in Catholic countries is the quote, and that definitely is the case, because Portugal, Spain, and the Latin American colonies definitely weren't happy with him, and that makes a lot of sense. So yeah, and of course, like, we see things today like Uncharted. He's really mentioned a lot. California, as I said before, too. There was a statue that was removed recently. Lots of streets were used to be named after him. A lot of that's changing now, though, and I think rightfully so. I think it's worth mentioning and talking about Drake. He had it is nice. He had worked with when he was raiding in Panama during the 1570s. He had a crew including French privateers. He worked with Maroons, who were enslaved Africans who had escaped from Spanish slave owners. One guy noted Diego was freed under him as well, and helped build ships that Drake would use. So he really is like a fictional character when you look at his exploits. It's really wild that he was able to just freaking live this long in a time when people were like dying from drinking water around their places. So
Well, I mean, isn't that how you get dysentery?
yeah, that's true. I
I'm
guess
not
he
sure,
did.
but
Yeah, I don't know either. I didn't. Oregon Trail never explained that. It just said you got it. The last kind of wild thing with him is there was this in the 1920s and 30s. This dude, I'm going to just kind of directly quote Wikipedia here. Oscar Hartzell perpetrated a vast confidence scheme. He convinced thousands of people, mostly in the American Midwest, that Drake's fortune was being held by the British government and had compounded to a huge amount. If their last name was Drake, they may be eligible for a share if they paid Hartzell to be their agent. So if you get a text message that says, "We've been trying to reach you about your last name, Drake," it is another car warranty scam. No, yeah. So this dude, the swindle continued until a copy of Drake's will was brought to Hartzell's mail fraud trial, and he was convicted. His mail fraud trial. That's what got him, and he was convicted and imprisoned. So maybe that's why Nathan Drake from Uncharted was trying to prove that he was related to him. He just wanted to continue the swindle. So yeah, it's pretty wild. There's also a myth that he's in his resting place in the ocean, waiting to rise again when England needs him, just like King Arthur. I guess they'll both pop up out of the ground and be like, "What are you doing here?" So yeah, that's Nathan, or that's Francis Drake in a nutshell. Pretty wild guy. I'm surprised there hasn't really been many movies or anything like that made out of him. I guess just he really is like the model pirate adventurer that we know. Most stuff is based off of today. I think that's really where it comes out of. It's pretty wild though. I think that's all I've got though, Cammy. Thanks for your story. I meant to look up. Maybe I'll kind of look up and comment. I meant to look up into knightings, like being knighted. I want to learn a little bit more about that, what it kind of constitutes. Is it really just a matter of like bribe? Like, was it a bribe in his case? Was it a matter of like exemplary service? I don't know. It's pretty interesting. So I'd like to kind of see like the precedent of people being knighted, like
well,
who gets...
it's like a bunch of musicians and actors now.
Correct. Yeah. Well, none of that. No one's attacking Spain, stealing from them, and giving it to England. So yeah, I wonder just at the time, contemporaries, like who was being knighted at the time and for what for. I imagine it would be pretty interesting, and what his social status was to enable it, that kind of thing. So yeah, well, thanks for your story again. Everyone, let us know what you think. If you have any suggestions for upcoming topics, let us know too. Mythstorie with an IE at Gmail. You can get in touch with us. You can also watch this on YouTube. We've got our link tree in the description as well. That takes you to everything that we've got. So click that and you can go anywhere you like. I think that's it. Cammy, anything to add?
That's all I've got.
All right, everyone. Well, we will see you next time.
Oh.
Yard.